Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Welcome back to my channel. So it's been over 2 weeks now since we witnessed the devastating mid-air accident in US history involving an American Eagle Flight 5342, which is a Bombardier CRJ-700, colliding with the US Army's UX-60 Black Hawk chopper, occurred at Washington DC's Ronald Reagan National Airport. But now from Washington DC, now let's dive into Toronto. This time we have witnessing yet another devastating accident involving another US airline, which is a Delta Connection Flight 4819, which is another Bombardier CRJ-900 LR variant, carrying 76 passengers and 4 crew members, which is actually scheduled for its departure from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Toronto Pearson Airport here in Canada. So alright guys, so let's get into the analysis of the sequence of events, and also surprisingly how miraculously all 80 passengers survived the accident in Toronto. So without further ado guys, let's get started right away. Alright guys, so as you can see on my screen, so this is the Bombardier CRJ-900 LR of Delta Connect Flight 4819 with its registration as November 932 X-ray Juliet. So this CRJ-900 is powered by two General Electric CF34-8C1 engines with a thrust range between 13,000 to 14,000 pounds of force. Well, the same engines are also operated both in CRJ-700 variant as well. And obviously, if you guys remember 2 weeks back, that this same aircraft, the Bombardier CRJ-700 of American Eagle, collided with the US Army's US-60 Black Hawk chopper at Washington's Reagan National Airport, killing everyone on board. So, well, if you guys didn't see that video, you can check that in the description below, where this is the same airframe involved in the mid-air collision. Right, now coming to this MSN of this aircraft, it is registered as 15194, and its airframe age is over 15 years old, and indeed it is a very old airframe. Speaking about the Delta Connect, so this Delta Connect Airlines is now operating under a subsidiary airline operator called Endeavour Air. So the fleet of Endeavour Air, what they are operating in, they are all being customized into Delta Connect livery, because although they are subsidiary partners here in this context. So now let's get into the passenger profile here. So according to the media reports, they stated that there were 76 passengers and 4 crew members on board, and among them there were 20 Canadian nationals were on board this flight as well. Alright, so now let's get into the flight sequence of events, what happened to Delta Connect Flight 4819. Alright guys, so as you can see on my screen, so this is the flight radar 24 data for Delta Connect Flight 4819 bound from Minneapolis to Toronto. Alright, so let's look at the flight recordings here as per the FR24 data. So at 5:37 UTC, the plane departed from Minneapolis carrying 76 passengers and 4 crew members on board. Among them is 20 Canadian nationals also on board the flight. So let's look at the altitude from the first phase of the flight. So the cruising altitude and also the speeds looks pretty stable. So there's no issue on the first phase of the flight. Alright, so let's zoom out here and let me show you on the mid-flight. So they are maintaining 29,000 feet with 555 knots. So again, the mid-flight also stable. So as soon as we reach towards to Toronto airspace in Canada, so they are now preparing for the final approach via ILS Runway 23. Okay, so as soon as the aircraft reached near to its final approach at runway 23 with ILS, so the ATC has instructed with the weather warning related to high gust winds of 35 knots with winds 270 for its final approach, and they actually granted for landing at Toronto Airport via runway 23. But there is also a large amounts of crosswinds also reported with high snowfall at Toronto. So one of the biggest challenges for a crosswind landing is, suppose my hand is the aircraft and this is my palm, assuming this to be as a runway here. So now when you are flying at a crosswind landing just like this, so the pilots have to make a split-second decision whether I have to continue the approach or whether I have to initiate a go around for another landing attempt. So usually crosswinds is a very risky landing. Usually if you are in a passenger seat, you may not even know that whether your aircraft is encountering a crosswind landing. But if you're sitting in a pilot's view, well, definitely you need to rely on instruments like rudder systems to just adjust the approach and just try to land it at the center line of the runway. So now let's look at the footage what according to media reports they have released. So let's get into that footage right away. Alright guys, so as you can see on my screen, so this is the final moments of Delta Connect Flight 4819 on final approach at Toronto Pearson International Airport via ILS Runway 23 approach method. So the ATC has already issued a landing clearance for Delta 4819 with winds 270, gusts at 35 knots. So initially what 35 knots describes to be as a possibility of a little crosswind landing. Okay, so let's play this footage right here in a very clear view. So this is from another pilot who is waiting for the departure. So let's play this footage right away. You can see the plane is making a normal descent approach. He's cruising at 120 kilometers per hour according to FR24 data. And then immediately what happened was the plane made a hard landing. Then afterwards the right wing made contact onto the tarmac, rolled over, and then the fuel caught fire, and immediately it scraped onto the runway in upside down. So that led to a severe worst landing I have never seen. Let me roll it back and I can show you very clearly in slow sequence. So this is the way that how the plane was cruising it during the descent. This is how it looks like. And then let's freeze up just right over here and let me scroll it slowly. So this is the initial point of contact where whenever you make a hard landing, very hard landing, so the landing gears would definitely suffer a severe damage. And then ultimately what happened was, because of the loss of control, the right wing makes contact just right over there onto the tarmac, and then immediately the right fuel tanks gets ruptured. That is, I mean, the right wing fuel tanks gets ruptured and ignites with fire. The right engine also catches fire and immediately started to roll up, and then ultimately what happened, the plane rolled over upside down, scraping onto the runway, and it halted just right in the middle of the runway intersection between runway 23 and runway 15. So ultimately you can also see just right below how much wind is gusting here. You can see there's the snow trails coming up here just right below. So that is where ATC has issued that there is a possibility of a crosswind landings at 35 knots of gusty winds. So look at this, the whole place is completely snowy, and even weather also is a bit cloudy as well as what I could see in this footage. So ultimately, based on my understanding with this footage, so there is some possibility of, was it a wind shear effect, or maybe the pilots made a risky move to land this aircraft safely. But the way of the landing was so, I mean, it's so very hard, and you know, you always need to rely on the rudder controls. So in order to land like this pattern, okay, so when you are in this crosswind pattern, so you suppose this is a tarmac, my palm is a tarmac, so you need to line up the aircraft at the center line. Always relies on using the rudder controls, right? So using your foot rudder controls, so that will only help you to once make a touchdown and then land safely and aligning with the center line of the runway. But here again, like I said, I don't know whether they're using it rudder controls or not, but the pilots made a little bit mistake just right over there. But I think this is a very hard landing to see this. But most probably weather is another one issue, is what I feel. Wind shear is a one possibility that I may see that in this footage. But again, wind shear would happen all of a sudden when a plane suddenly descends it rapidly. So that is a one big factor to think about it. But again, I'm not exactly sure, but that is what I believe it. But let's look at the another footage, this time from the passengers view who have survived this devastating accident. Now, without further ado, let's look into that passengers view footage, which was released from the media officials. So let's dive into it. Right. All right, guys. So as you can see on my screen, so this is another footage from one of the passengers who survived crash at Toronto's Pearson Airport. So let me play this footage immediately. You can see the fuselage of this aircraft completely intact, and what we have seen in the footage, when the plane made a hard landing, the plane actually bounced a bit and then tilted to the right, where the right wing made contact first. So at that particular moment, we all worried that the plane might break up into pieces, but miraculously it didn't happen. Just only the right wing got sheared off completely, and the engines of General Electric CF34-HC1 engines completely burned up instantly, and you can see the rescuers are trying to get inside the aircraft to remove the passengers who were trapped. They were all harnessed with the seat belts while they're sitting upside down. Even you can see from the eyewitnesses footage also showing the passengers disembarking from the aircraft. They were completely upside down, and flight crew did a phenomenal job disembarking all the passengers from the wreckage. One big result is all 80 passengers survived the crash, and only 18 passengers were heavily injured while they released the seat belts and fallen into the ceiling while they're sitting upside down. But even you can see here, this is the front landing gear, which is still intact, but you can see these are the scratch marks on the right side of the fuselage here. That clearly shows that the plane made a rollover, and you can clearly see these are the scratch marks indeed. But yeah, now there are two things that what some are believing to be the cause of the crash as. One would be a weather issue, well, because of a wind shear, and one familiar situation what I could recollect reminds me back in 1985. That is the same Delta Airlines flight 191, which was operated with Lockheed Martin's L1011 TriStar. At that time, it was a very famous trijet aircraft operating in various airlines around the world. So this aircraft was on a scheduled flight from Fort Lauderdale to Los Angeles with a stopover at Dallas Fort Worth. So they were carrying 163 passengers on board. So while they were making an approach at Dallas, so the weather looks pretty turbulent. But even though pilots decided to proceed through to the Dallas airport for the final approach, but what unexpected happened was while they were making a final approach, the aircraft encountered a sudden wind shear. So suppose if this is an aircraft here, and wind shear happens when sudden turbulence would force the aircraft into a sudden descent rate rapidly. So as a result, suddenly pilots lost control, and they slammed into the ground. And even though when they tried to apply the brakes, it didn't work, and ultimately collided with the fuel tanks which are adjacent to the runway. So that led to the aircraft broken into 2 to 3 pieces, and miraculously only just 26 passengers survived the deadliest accident of Delta Flight 191. Actually, they were sitting at the rear end of the L1011 aircraft. So at that time, investigation revealed that the pilots couldn't even see the runway clearly, and although weather also plays a key role there, with sudden wind shear played a very key factor, and pilots unable to control the aircraft. But in this situation, well, now as the regulations have grown up, and also upgrading all the avionics with multiple warning systems from TCAS systems and including the wind shear warnings. So actually, while they were making a crosswind landings, and if there is a sudden wind shear, So the proximity warning sensor should alert the pilots that there is a wind shear up ahead. So the pilots have to make a split-second decision whether I should continue the approach or to make a go around. So when the ATC has said to Delta Connect Flight 4819 for landing clearance with winds 270, gusts at 35 knots. So gusts at 35 knots means one question still remains is this aircraft capable of making a crosswind landing at 35 knots? Well, obviously it does, but all relies on the pilot's instincts right there. So like I said, you need to make a crosswind landings by using your rudder controls, so that you need to land up just at the center line of the runway. So now here also one question triggers is, was there any flight problems or is it due to the weather issue? So again, it is still unknown at the moment, but ultimately in a miraculous circumstances, well, all 80 passengers survived this deadliest accident. But one thing is, I always rely on investigation team from both the Canadian investigation team and the National Transportation Safety Board, because although Bombardier CRJ is already manufactured by Canadians, so they will be taking responsibility at first hand. So ultimately, guys, I wish to those 18 passengers who are injured, I wish them with a very speedy recovery. And like I said before, I'm still relying on the Canadian Investigation Board and National Transportation Safety Board to get clarifications on what led to this cause of this crash, and all relies on the recoveries of the black boxes, both cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorders, which are yet to be recovered at this time. So this is the sequence of events what happened to Delta Connect Flight 4819, and I wish that in the wake of this incident, well, the aviation safety has to be improved furthermore with strict recommendations and new regulations to be adopted is what I expect. So let's see what happens next. Right, so thank you so much for watching this video, and please like and subscribe to my channel, and we will see you again in the next one. Until then, guys, fast flights and soft landings to you.